Hungarian Folk Tales. How I passed my childhood. Now, when I was born and all of 6 weeks old, out I went into the street on a hot summer's day, and I met a true old friend of mine, who was a bottle ahead of me and tipsy with it. So we made a pair of oxen out of mud, a cart and sacks to load onto the cart to take them off to the mill and grind them. And off we went. Now, in those days there was a water mill to do the milling, but it wasn't there. The miller was strolling up and down on the water, and so we asked him to call up the mill, and he waved for it and shouted until up it came and we could start to mill away. Now, the miller man didn't have a scoop, so he pulled off my head and used that as a scoop. So when we were finished and off I went on my way home, who did I meet but a shower of women and young ones who started to laugh at me. "What are you laughing at?" says I. "Ah, you don't have a head," says they. And that's how I knew I'd left my head behind in the mill. Back I went, put the head onto my neck, and off for home again. But the women and the young ones were laughing at me again. "Now, what are you laughing at?" says I. "Isn't your nose at the back of your head?" says they. So I gave my head a good twist to set it right and off for home again. Now that's when I remembered that I'd stuck my whip into the ground behind the mill pond. Back I went, but when I got there, what did I see but that a great big tree had shot up from it and my old whip was up at the top. So up and up I climbed, and there at the top, what did I find but a hawk chasing a whole cloud of little birds, trying to catch them any way at all. Straight away the little birds, one and all, flew right up my sleeves, into my shirt, and right up my legs, into my breeches. Quick as a flash I tied up my sleeves and breeches, and wasn't I happy that I'd caught so many birds. Yes, indeed. And all these birds in my shirt and breeches started off chirping and tweeting, and all of them giving off in their own language, until up they flew with me and carried me off far, far away. I saw the women washing and scrubbing down on the edge of the sea. They looked up and shouted out, "Look at that big bird!" But I thought I heard them say, "Loosen your shirt!" So that's what I did, and out flew the birds and down I plopped into the sea. I made such a big splash that I emptied out all the water and the fishes were all left around me. So I gathered up a fine lot of them. I didn't waste any more time there because I was far from home. So I set off back through Hotland. Now, Hotland is a strange country indeed, where they don't build their houses on the ground, but up in the air at the height of a man. So they need ladders to get in. The people in Hotland are all big and tall, and everything is big. Even the church was so big that there were 4 soldiers in there on a horseback, and when the priest chanted, "The Lord be with you," one of the soldiers spurred his horse and off he went, and he intoned it to the second soldier to the third to the fourth, and he sang it to the respondent. So long was the Mass that the congregation could have done with a good breakfast, but that was no problem at all, since the altar was made of ham and the candles were sausages. And just as big and tall was the steeple of the church. When 2 carpenters were building it, they dropped their hatchets, and by the time one of them fell to the earth, it had rotted away. And when the second was in the air, a lark nested in it, and before it reached the ground, it had laid its eggs and raised its chicks. The bell was so large, the only way they could get it into the belfry was to carry it up when it was a baby and let it grow up there. It was hotter than hot there, so hot that all they did was slaughter a pig, put it in a pan, and put the pan out of the window, and straight away they had roast pork. But I didn't waste too much time there either. I'd had enough and continued on my way home. That's how I got to Cold Land. It was so cold there that the white of an egg would freeze so brightly that you could read a newspaper by its light. You couldn't speak there unless you could read, because when a man said a word, it straight away froze in front of him and the other had to read it. But I didn't waste too much time in Cold Land. On I went, on my way home. By the end, I was getting so fed up with the journey that I stuck my whip into the earth and climbed up to the heavens. And there was my grandmother. "The best of the day to you, Grandma. Do you have some bread and jam for me?" "Oh dear, son," says she. "Up here we don't really eat." "You don't? Then how do I get down from here quickly?" Then an old man arrived and I told him as well that I wanted to get back down because there was no bread and jam to be had here at all. The old man remembered that they had a chest of bran and we twisted a rope out of that. I could lower myself down. And as true as I'm here, we plaited it fine enough, but a mouse somehow got into it, and when I was lowering myself back down, that little mouse bit right through the rope, and I plopped down into the ground. I thought I was in the old town somewhere near the church, but I wasn't. I was at the edge of the new town, and I was well and truly drilled into the earth, so I shouted out for them to dig me out, but no one came. So I had to go home for a spade and dig myself out. And that's all I remember of my own younger days and how I passed them. Hungarian Folk Tales. Pepperpot Peter. Once upon a time, there lived a king who lived in doleful sorrow because he had a daughter who limped. His daughter wept and cried day and night because if someone came to court her, they up and left straight away. The king was afraid that his only daughter would spinster her life away, and so he sent the word across his kingdom that whoever could cure his daughter would live in wealth until the day he died. Now so many swarmed to the castle that the doorknob always had a hand on it, but the king's daughter still limped. Pepperpot Peter also went to try his luck. They called him Pepperpot Peter because he was really very little. So off went Peter and went on his way until he came upon a poor woman who was carrying a heavy load of wood. "Let me help you, old lady. I'll carry this," said Peter. And while the old woman was trying to thank him, he had already stacked the wood for her. "What brings you to this distant land?" asked the old woman just when Peter was bidding her farewell. "I'm off to cure the limping daughter of the king." "Well, fine it is that you met with me, because only I know what the cure is. But it's not easy to get hold of." "Well, tell me which way I have to go." "Listen carefully, son. On the summit of the glass mountain, there's a little lamb, and around its neck, there's a golden bell. If you can ring that bell 3 times under the girl's window, then you are sure to cure her. And how can I find my way there?" "Only with the magic horse of the king of the giants. And no one has ever been able to get it out of its stable." Pepperpot Peter thanked her for her directions, and off he went without stopping until he came to the castle of the king of the giants. Under the gate was a hole, and through he went, straight to the stables. He tried to untie the magic horse. The horse let out such a whinny that the king of the giants fell out of his chair, for lest I forget, the king was at his dinner. Well then, off he ran straight to the table. Peter, in his great fear, turned into a flea and hid in the manger. When the king of the giants left, Peter climbed out again to untie the tether of the magic horse. Again the horse let out a whinny, this time so loud that the king hit his head against the wall, and off he ran to the stables without pause for thought. Once again he saw not a soul, because Peter turned into a flea and hid in the manger. The king gave the horse a good whack. Why should it be whinnying when no one was hurting it? At his third try, Peter managed to untie the horse. In vain it whinnied. The king didn't go to the stable. When Peter got through the castle gate with the magic horse, it whinnied so loudly that the walls of the 3 bastions trembled. The king came out in a rage and saw that his horse had been stolen. He jumped on the back of a tomcat and off he went after Peter. Peter was very pleased with the horse. The moment he set his spurs to it, the horse flew to the glass mountain. There he saw the little lamb with the golden bell dancing in the silken meadow. He went up to the lamb, but when he tried to take the bell off the lamb's neck, an angry little devil popped out of the ground. "I've been waiting for you, you good-for-nothing," he told Peter, shook him fiercely and ordered him to make a barrel in the woods. When Peter had finished, the little devil went out and sat on the rim of the barrel and said, "Now I'm going to stuff you into the barrel, you thief." Peter saw that this was no joke and suddenly turned into a bee and stung the little so hard on the finger that it fell backwards into the barrel. Peter quickly put the lid onto the barrel, leaving a tiny hole so the little devil wouldn't suffocate. He took the bell off the lamb's neck, jumped onto the horse, and didn't stop until he got to the window of the limping daughter of the king. He rang the bell for the first time and saw that the bushes and trees started to dance. Then he rang the bell for the second time, and the court chamberlain and all the courtiers came out with the king himself, and everyone danced and sang. He rang the bell for the third time, and then the king's daughter opened the window. Pepperpot Peter asked her to dance with him, and she didn't limp, not even a step. So joyful were they all that no one wanted to stop the revelry. "Well, my son, you have cured my daughter. Marry her and make her your wife for life." With that, he took the crown off his head and gave it to Peter, and he was just about to try it on when the king of the giants arrived on the back of the tomcat. You can imagine the panic. The king of the giants opened his mouth wide and swallowed down the whole court in one gulp. He didn't even hiccup. He only spat out the trees and the bricks the way that someone else spits out cherry stones. Peter, at the last moment, had jumped aside and hidden in the trouser pocket of the king of the giants. There he was safe and sound. The king himself was so full that he could hardly breathe, so he sat down on the ground. Pepperpot Peter waited until he had fallen asleep. Then he climbed out of the pocket, called 1,000 spiders together, so that he couldn't move. Then Pepperpot Peter somersaulted across the belly of the giant, and it burst straight away, and the people of the court were saved. 99 tailors sewed up the stomach of the king of the giants. By the time they had finished, the giant had slept it off. But he didn't have such a good time at Peter's wedding feast, for all he could eat was 3 oxen. A month and a day after the wedding, Peter took possession of the kingdom under the name of Pepperpot Peter the First. And that's the end of my story. Hungarian Folk Tales. Martin and the Cursed Princess. Once upon a time, there was a poor man who had 3 sons. The youngest son's name was Martin. When the boys grew up, their father turned to them and said, "Well, boys, you've had enough to eat at home, and now you're old enough and strong enough to work. 1 year from now, I want you each to return home with a suit of clothes. Off you go, and may God bless you all." The boys did as they were told and they started their journey. After a while, they reached a huge old tree. At this point, the road forked into 3 directions. The boys said goodbye to each other, and each of them started walking down a different path. As Martin walked along, he reached a forest. A huge, warty frog was approaching him and spoke to Martin. "I know you're looking for a job. Come on, work for me, and you won't be sorry. All you have to do is chop and saw some wood, plus put me to bed in the evenings and raise me out of bed in the mornings. Well, what do you say? I'm your man. Wherever I have to work, it's all the same." So he shook the frog's hand and stayed. A whole year passed by. The frog was not a bad employer at all. On the last day it said, "Well, Martin, you've done a good job. Your brothers are taking their new clothes home. But never mind, just go into the pantry and pick whatever you like." Martin selected a nice suit of clothes and started on his return journey homewards. At the old tree, he met his brothers again. "Well, who employed you, Martin?" But as soon as Martin told that he was employed by a frog, the boys nearly fell over laughing. But when they saw his new suit of clothes, they all stopped laughing. They grew yellow with envy. After they got home, they stayed home for a while, but when spring came, their father once again spoke to them. "Well, boys, it's time for you to be working again. But this time tell your masters to pay you with wine." The boys did as they were told. When they got to the tree, they said goodbye again, and each went on his way. The frog was already there in the forest. "Come and work for me, Martin. Your job will be as easy as it was the last time." Martin was already used to the frog, and he didn't mind working at all. When the new year was up, the frog told him, "Hey, Martin, your brothers are already busy carrying their wine home. Never mind anything. Go, find a bottle and walk down into the cellar. Fill it up with the wine you like the best." So the year went by and the boys met once again at the crossroads. Both brothers were rolling a sizable barrel as they went. When they spotted Martin, they couldn't help laughing at him. "Well, that frog master of yours is not a generous employer. All he ever gave you was this miserable little bottle." Martin didn't say anything. He rolled out the largest barrel and poured the wine into it. "Maybe a smaller barrel will be more appropriate," they mocked at him. But it didn't last for long, because when they saw that the bottle was simply not running out of wine, they were so astonished that their eyes bulged out. Their amazement grew when they tasted it. They rested at home for a while, but then their father sent them off to work again. "Now you have clothes and you have wine of your own, and you are ready to get married. But you have to find a wife." The boys did like before, and when they got to the fork in the road, they said goodbye to each other once again. Martin went to see his frog, and the 2 elder brothers went their own way, whatever it was. The frog told Martin, "Well, Martin, this time it's not going to be as easy as before. This time you will have to chop and stack up 3 times as much wood as last year." When the year was over, the frog told Martin, "You've done a good job again, but now you have to be very careful. Gather up my bed linen and take it to the top of that wood stack. Then carry me up and place me on the top of the stack." Martin did as he was told and finally placed the frog on top of the pile of wood. Then he heard the frog call down from the top of the wood, "All right, now go, find a broom, then set the wood stack on fire, and as soon as the wood catches fire, you will see frogs leaping towards the fire from all sides. You must sweep all of them up into the fire, but beware, don't let any of them get away, because that would mean great trouble." Martin begged the frog to come down from the top of the pile, but the frog didn't listen. In the end, he had no choice. He had to set fire to the stack of wood. There was a lot of panic and commotion. There were so many frogs, Martin could hardly sweep them all onto the fire. By nightfall, the fire burned down. The frogs were all lost, including Martin's frog master. Martin was very, very sad. He was still full of sorrow when he fell asleep. The next morning, when he opened his eyes, he saw a beautiful maiden standing next to his bed. "Martin, thank you for saving me. I had to live as a frog with all my household until an honest lad came along and did everything as I told him. But now you have removed the curse." Martin's heart beat loudly when he saw her. The princess jumped into his arms and said, "Your brothers are going home with their wives, but don't you worry. Go down to the courtyard and bring the horses to the best carriage. By the time they get home, we'll be there before them." And so it happened. There was great astonishment and a lot of envy. But Martin was a good brother. He gave each of his brothers 3 sacks full of gold. Then he married the princess and went off to rule as a king. Maybe he could have found himself a better job, but he had no reason to complain, did he now?